Hello, everyone. My name is Linnea Anderson. I am the archivist in the Social Welfare History Archives and a member of the First Fridays Committee. On behalf of the committee and the Archives and Special Collections Department, welcome to First Fridays Online. This season, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of First Fridays in the Archives and Special Collections. Join us for presentations on anniversaries, beginnings, milestones, and memories throughout our collections. Today's presentation will also be posted later on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel, so you should be able to access it within the next few weeks. First Fridays is a monthly series of presentations made possible by a generous gift from Governor Elmer L. Andersen and Mrs. Eleanor Andersen, in honor of former library director, Dr. Edward B. Stanford. The presentations are based on materials in the University Library's archives and special collections. A special thank you to Alan and Jason from Middle English Interpreting, who will be providing ASL interpretation for today's presentation. If you have any questions for our speaker today, please submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please use Q&A and not the chat so that we can keep track of your questions. You can submit questions at any time, but we are going to hold them until the end of the presentation as time allows. We will now pause for a land acknowledgement. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase aspects to all aspects of higher education for American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. Our presentation today is a grand opening celebrating the establishment of the Elmer L. Andersen Library, presented by Tim Johnson, Curator of Special Collections and Rare Books. During the first week of April 2000, the university community celebrated the opening of Andersen Library as the latest jewel in the university library system. This presentation will recall some of those early days, including construction, collection moves into the building, and a series of special events that unveiled Andersen Library and its collections to the public.
All right, can everyone hear me? And can everyone see the screen? I hope so. So thank you, Linnea, for that introduction. And as you mentioned, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of First Fridays in the department. And I'm just going to start my timer here so that I know that I'm not going to go over, because I've got lots to share. Unfortunately, we're still operating in a virtual mode. So I'm sorry you're not here in this familiar space to enjoy our time together. And if I was standing in room 120 upstairs, I'm actually down in my office, I would pan my laptop right now to show the room. It's too empty. We need you here. We want you here. So we miss you. And we look forward to that time when we can be back together in person. Now, even though we're removed by 18 months from marking the 20th anniversary of the opening of the Elmer L. Andersen Library, we thought it appropriate to kick off this First Friday season with a look back at the establishment of Andersen Library. So over the course of the next minutes together, I want to recount some of those events which led up to our week of grand opening festivities. I'll begin with groundbreaking and then talk a bit about construction and the collection moves before focusing on that first week of April in 2000, when we had the opportunity to introduce and welcome people to our new home in Andersen Library. I might also speculate a bit on how First Fridays, or at least the name, came into being. So I joined the staff in July 1998, and some of these events had already happened, and I'm relying on the memory of others to fill those gaps. But most of what follows comes from my experience as maybe the sole member of the current Department of Archives and Special Collections who was here at the time and participated in most of these activities. Before starting this tale, I want to take a moment to pay tribute to some key individuals who played pivotal roles in making Andersen Library a reality. There were many people, and I stress many people, who supported these efforts and lobbied for this library. And I don't want to discount their roles in any way. But for me, these folks were key. Don Kelsey, affectionately known as the library's space officer. Bill DeJohn, director of Minitex. Kathy Droz, assistant director of Minitex. Tom Shaughnessy, university librarian. Rudy Vicoli, director of the Immigration History Research Center, and his daughter, Lisa, who I think together spent hours and days and weeks and months thinking about and lobbying for and breathing life into and making Andersen a reality. Don, Bill, and Rudy are no longer with us, but the spirit of their work is apparent to anyone who enters Andersen Library. Now, the story begins at least 40 years ago, but I won't go into all those details. Suffice it to say that when I was a library school graduate student in the early 1980s, the staff parking lot and vacant land south and west of Wilson Library were prime targets for campus expansion. Some plans were conceived or rumored for an archival facility in this space. A graduate student from Australia designed a 4-story Sherlock Holmes research center to occupy this space, complete with an indoor waterfall. And remember what happened to Professor Moriarty. Now, he did that for his master's thesis. However, Kurt Carlson's generous gift to the university changed the narrative arc of this tale. The Carlson School came into being, and dreams of a specialized archival building faded into the background. But those thoughts were not forgotten. Before it was known as the Elmer L. Andersen Library, this facility was called the Minnesota Library Access Center, or MLAC. I heard the origin story for the library, both from Don Kelsey and from Tom Shaughnessy. After the university rejected Tom's plan to extend Wilson to that west parking lot area, they tried to give the library, as Tom says, the asbestos-filled former Federal Reserve building in downtown Minneapolis for book storage. Tom rightly rejected the offer. Now, according to Don Kelsey, sometime around 1989, 2 colleagues from the university's underground space center were making a presentation to the university architect. The discussion involved the application of mined space for parking expansion on campus. And in the course of their comments, They mentioned in passing that the natural environment of the caverns was 57 degrees Fahrenheit year-round and about 70% relative humidity. Now, Don said he perked up immediately because those conditions are very close to ideal conditions for the preservation of paper. Don goes on, and these comments are taken from a video conversation that Don and others had about Andersen Library. Don said, "So we commissioned a pre-designed study of the building in 1990. And this was also something supported by Harvey Turner, who was in the university budget and planning office. And in that study, one of the things Don asked the architect to do was to try out at least one version of the building using mined space to see if that was feasible. Mined space was feasible. The 1994 legislative session approved $2.7 million for planning an archival research facility, following some very intense lobbying by staff, friends of the library, and others who had a concern with all things archival. Construction money for the building was provided by the legislature in 1996. On February 11th, 1997, Governor Arne Carlson's office announced his approval for the issuance of $38.5 million in bonds for the Minnesota Library Access Center. MLAC was conceived as a facility which would, quote, provide storage space for less frequently used materials owned by the university and other Minnesota libraries, and will include technologically advanced digitization and preservation facilities. MLAC will also house the University of Minnesota's Twin City campus archival units, unquote. Interestingly, it was the digitization facilities that were among the factors that led to the approval for the issuance of the bonds. And when it got down to designs and planning, they even made a model of what the cavern portal might look like. So let's move ahead. Groundbreaking, May 9th, 1997. On May 9th, more than 250 library supporters and friends attended the groundbreaking for MLAC. According to the reporters, the ceremony took place at the base of the bluffs on the Mississippi River's west bank, near where the center's storage caverns will be built. The ceremony was opened by University librarian Tom Shaughnessy and University President Niels Hassemo. Peter Radosevich, former member of the Minnesota House of Representatives and currently at that time an official with the YMCA of Metropolitan Minneapolis, also spoke to the group. Other dignitaries included University Vice President Marvin Marshak, State Senator Steve Kelly, Professor Rudy Vicoli, Director of the Immigration History Research Center, Professor Emeritus Clark Chambers, founder of the Social Welfare History Archives, and former university librarian Dr. Ralph Hopp. Members of Minitex and the library staff also attended. And here in these pictures, you can see in the upper left, we have Al Lathrop, who was curator of the manuscripts division, and Barb Bazat, his assistant, Bill DeJohn and Kathy Droz, and then the assembled dignitaries below with their shovels at the groundbreaking. And at the time of the groundbreaking, construction of the $38.5 million center was expected to be completed in late 1999. So let's look at the cavern excavation starting after that groundbreaking in 97. First with some views from the East Bank. So I have a series of photographs of the construction, many of them taken by Bill Tanzen from the libraries, and kept these many, many years by Minitex. I want to publicly thank Paul Swanson for providing me with hundreds of images, and also thank Cheryl Fong, curator of the Northwest Architectural Archives, for images from the Staggerberg Byers Sachs collection. So first, these images taken from the East Bank. So I've got a series of photographs, and you'll notice too, this is an early time of digital photography. So the resolution is maybe not what we would have today, but it gives you a sense of the progression of the excavation as it went forward. So I'm just going to fade through these photographs so that you can get a sense. I don't have the exact date of when they started to scratch away at the bluff, but I believe it was probably shortly after the groundbreaking, June or July of 97. And you can see the exposed limestone, which will eventually form the ceiling of the cavern. And as you can see from this plan of the cavern site from December 16th, 1997, mining had progressed from the portal entrance into the first portion of what would become the internal driveway to the loading dock. And this photograph from the Staggerberg Byers Sachs collection shows what the caverns looked like at the time. So you're seeing the limestone ceiling and the sandstone, which is being excavated out. Then we have another series of pictures of the cavern excavation from the Washington Avenue Bridge. So another series of photographs, a little bit closer than we were before. And in this particular image, you can see the beginnings of the outlines of the portal on the left and right of the entrance. And then the portal in more finished form. So another update here, you can see the mining progress as of the 20th of January, 98. The operations moved closer to what would become the loading dock area and the stub end on the north, and into the first portion of the archives and special collections mezzanine space. And another Staggerberg image gives you a sense of the progress at this time. I have to admit, I got totally drawn in by these photographs, so I hope you don't mind. Another closer view, again from the Washington Avenue Bridge of the excavation. And you can also see that larger circle in front. They're starting to dig out for the what will become the driveway. So then let's take a quick look too at that driveway, moving a little closer to home. You also notice in this photograph from the Staggerberg collection that the portal arch is actually constructed a little bit away from the limestone face. There's a void behind there that will eventually be filled with other material. So this is looking down from the Washington Avenue Bridge towards what will become the drive into the caverns off of West River Road. Working in all kinds of weather. And another mining update here. So by March 2nd of 1998, the mining is now about a fourth of the way into the archive's mezzanine space and progressing towards the stub end on the north and the loading dock. And this next picture is one of my favorites. This is from the Staggerberg collection, and very dramatically gives you a sense of what it looked like in the caverns with the sunlight coming down through what is now the elevator shaft. So let's go underground and take a peek at what's happening there. Another progress report first. So by March 25th, 1998, the excavators are nearing the halfway point in both caverns. The north stub end is opened up and they're well past the elevator shaft. And another Staggerberg photograph. These are all contemporaneous from the time. So as the caverns began to open, several hard-hatted visitors took in the sights and watched the work in progress. So top left, Tom Shaughnessy with some other visitors. Top right, Bill DeJohn from Minitex. A picture of the elevator shaft, and Kathy Droz trying to escape the photographer. Not quite successfully. View from inside the cavern looking out towards heavy equipment in the Washington Avenue Bridge. Some of the heavy equipment used in assembling the concrete panels that form the inner storage area. And then another image of the caverns and the curved concrete panels that are being put into place to form the outer walls. More images of the work. Top left, you see them lifting panels into place to form the ceiling. There's about a 4-foot gap between that upper ceiling and the limestone above, which allowed them to get their equipment in there and also kind of extra space to address any mechanical concerns later on. Lots of lifts and trucks. The big truck on the lower left hauling in more of those concrete panels, and specially adapted front end loaders being used to lift those panels into place. Another update on the mining. So here we are, April 29th, 1998. We're about 3/4 of the way into the caverns. And work begins to focus more and more on finishing out those storage areas. And here another image from the Staggerberg Byers-Sachs collection where you can see those curved panels being put into place against the sandstone. And eventually behind those panels, they'll pump in grout to fill the voids between the stone and the concrete. Some more images of work assembling the panels. Many rock bolts, 1,000 rock bolts put into the limestone ceiling to help stabilize the rock bolts. A little lower left picture gives you some sense of perspective, the size of an individual as opposed to those panels forming the walls of the storage area. The ventilation that was needed, the front end, the loaders lifting those panels into place, the shelving starting to arrive and be readied, cinder block walls being put up in some places, but still a sandy bottom. And this was about the time after my arrival of getting a tour down here into the caverns. And I remember walking through the sand as we toured. More cinder blocks being put up in place. Kathy and Bill, on one of their tours, I think they made a lot of visits down to the caverns to check on the progress. And then with the concrete floors going into the storage space, you begin to get a sense of the vastness of the space. Looking back towards the elevator shaft, now somewhere, and I tried to get this for my presentation, but it's not available at the moment, but Dave Clausen, who was the archivist for the Social Welfare History Archives, has a video somewhere of me running wind sprints in this open space before the shelving was installed. The concrete was absolutely smooth. And of course, we were not going to let anybody with skateboards know that this place existed because they would have gone wild, or roller skaters or roller bladers or any. And the floor was not only smoothed, but leveled to within thousandths of an inch, so that later on, when you were operating one of the stock pickers, you would not be swaying at the top because of an uneven floor. Some of the shelving beginning to be installed in one of the collection areas. And there's some debate, I don't know where the phrase bay arose, but in the early parts of construction and on some of, I think, the architectural drawings and plans, these large areas are referred to as bays. So we still refer to high bay in the archives and special collections area. But that was part of some of the original planning documents, was the use of that word bay to describe these large spaces. A peek down the what we call the interstitial space between the outer curved walls and the inner collection area, which was also, after the concrete panels were put into place, rubber vapor barrier and an insulating barrier were installed over those concrete panels, again, to keep the inner temperature and humidity constant. And here you can see more of the shelving has gone into place. I'm not sure I would have done this, but Kathy Droz, and I think that might be Bill Tansen, I'm not sure, they're on the upper mezzanine section, straddling those metal struts before the concrete was actually poured to form the flooring for the upper mezzanine section. But you can also see the shelving extends through the floor. It's one continuous unit. And then a couple of other photographs of shelving being installed throughout the cavern storage area. So meanwhile, what's going on above ground? So this is what the site looked like in summer of '97, moving into the fall. The old Studio Arts building in the distance, but this is the place where eventually the upper building, or the superstructure, the upper building, will come into being. One of the curious things that you notice in some of these photographs is this large circular form that was poured, and I think actually working as a retaining wall while excavation was done on the elevator shaft. Later on, this concrete form will be demolished as the site is leveled out at the level, the grade level of the elevator shaft once that excavation is complete. But it still is a little bit of a mystery to me, this concrete circle. So another series of images here to kind of take you through what's happening on the above ground site. There you can see the elevator shaft and the other retaining walls, the beginnings of the concrete forms and the concrete walls, which will form the lower level of Andersen Library. More walls in place. Decking going down to create floor, and the elevator shaft continuing to rise to the upper levels. The steel structures going, beams going into place, and additional flooring, the elevator shaft continuing to rise. Another perspective on what's happening above ground. Now it was somewhere around this point, maybe before the cinder blocks went up, that an unnamed colleague and I decided to explore what was going on in the building. So after work one day, we actually snuck in and crawled up what is now the south stairwell to get a view inside. And as we were exiting, I think, onto the first floor, somebody in a hard hat saw us and yelled at us and asked us to leave, which we did. But we were very anxious to see what was going on and what this new space was going to look like. So I got the boot. More progress being made on the above ground building, cinder block, and the beginnings of some of the brick courses. More brick, and this we're looking at the south side of the building from the plaza. And then some aerial shots that were taken probably from the social science tower of progress on the above ground building. More brick after the weatherproofing, and also you can see on the roof. So on to the move. And here I could maybe spend an entire presentation on the move. But at the same time, I don't at present have a lot of photographic evidence of the move. So I'm not going to spend as much time as I maybe had originally hoped talking about the move, but some things you should know. The move involved 8 different units that were in what we called at the time SCAR, which was Special Collections and Archives. 3 of those units the Couts Family YMCA Archives, the Immigration History Research Center Archives, and the Manuscripts Division were located off campus on or near Berry Street. 4 of the units were located on the East Bank, that being Social Welfare History Archives, the Babbage Institute, University Archives, and I'm blanking on the other one, Children's Literature Research Collection. So those 4 were in Walter. And then I had the shortest move, Special Collections and Rare Books. We were in Wilson Library. So we actually got to move part of the collection very early on and then move the rest of the collection very late in the process. The move itself took about 2 years to plan and choreograph and about 6 months to execute. We started moving, as I recall, in late September, early October of 1999, and finished in March of 2000, about 2 weeks before we opened the doors to our new home in Andersen Library. So you also have to imagine in this move, the weekly meetings that we had at the building on Berry Street, which had the largest meeting table that we could get everybody around. So imagine 15 or so people around a couple of large wooden tables in what was, I think, the lunch or break room for the manuscripts and immigration history folks. Each week, planning out the move, thinking about security needs, and we had security on both ends of the move once it got underway, trying to figure out how much space each unit needed and mapping out that space into the new cavern space and the shelving that was being installed. So there were a lot of pieces to fit together to make that move happen, and it went very, very smoothly. But it took a lot of time. So maybe more on the move at a later point. If anybody's got photographs out there of the move, I found this one of the large trucks that was used when we were moving from Walter, but photographically, it's not well documented. I will say one other thing about the move. The last thing to become operational in the library was the elevator. And so for about the first week or week and a half, any collections that or items that we needed to move from the lower cavern area up to the reading rooms was all done by going on the stairway. 143 or 144 steps, depending on how you were counting. So we all got some very good exercise before those elevators started to function. Also, in terms of the move in the caverns, the last pieces there were the 2 lifts, the 2 crown lifts that we used to get to the upper shelves. So the movers, absent those lifts, devised what I might best describe as a conveyor like you would use to put hay in the loft in a barn. And they constructed some scaffolding and tilted this conveyor up, and then things were put on the conveyor and moved up to the upper levels of the shelves. So that's how we got things up high before we had access to the lifts. It was all a big adventure. So the grand opening the planning for the grand opening took a better part of a year. But before I talk about the opening festivities, let me spend a moment and tell you a special story about Governor Andersen. At Governor Andersen's 90th birthday party on June 26th, 1999, held in St. Paul, University President Mark Yudof announced that the Minnesota Library Access Center would be named the Elmer L. Andersen Library. It was a very nice birthday present. President Yudof said this: This recognition is uniquely suited to a life that has so profoundly influenced our state, the university, and the world of books and publishing. University librarian Tom Shaughnessy offered this remark. In view of his stature in the community, his great love of the university, and his many contributions toward improving the quality of life in Minnesota, it is most fitting that this new library facility bears his name. Now, what you see on the screen right now happened about 9 months later, and with the blessing of my boss, Jim Cogswell, who was the library's head of collection development. So I sent this email. And in it, I asked my colleagues to spread the word, to gather together in Andersen Library to welcome the governor and Eleanor when they came for a private tour. My recollection is that Eleanor could not make it that day, so it was Governor Andersen alone. And my colleagues in spreading the word did not disappoint. A very large number of the staff, easily over 100, maybe closer to 200, lined the main atrium stairway as well as the second and third floor concourses. And exactly on time, Governor Andersen rounded the corner of the large limestone wall in the atrium in his wheelchair. And the atrium erupted in applause. I mean, erupted. Somewhat taken by surprise, Governor Andersen waited until the clapping subsided and then gracefully spoke to us of his deep appreciation for our work and the importance of such a facility to the university and the world. And I get a little choked up just remembering, because for me, it was one of those moments I will always treasure. So on finally to the opening week in April of 2000. Now, there were several events, and let me stop. Well, I'll save this for later. I have some facts and figures I'll give you, but let's go through opening week, and then I'll give you those facts and figures. So there were several events planned for the week of April 5th to 9th, and they were headed by Tom Swain, Governor Andersen's former chief of staff, leaders from the Friends of the Libraries, and members of the archives and special collection staff. The staff and volunteers spent months working on the details. Our main concern as the staff was with the opening exhibition. And we also worked with Larson Design in creating this exhibition, each case displaying treasures from the collections. But before the exhibit formally opened, there was Media Day. The exhibit opened on Saturday, but we had a Media Day on Wednesday, and media kits were prepared. University librarian Tom Shaughnessy welcomed the attendees, and 5 different tours were arranged. A printing press demonstration on the half-size replica printing press that Governor Andersen had donated to the libraries. A tour of the new Minitex facilities, the Gustafson Room, which is one of the permanent exhibition rooms in the library, the opening exhibit itself, and the Caverns. So I was kept busy with the printing press and the Gustafson Room while Kathy Drost covered Minitex. Jim Cogswell spoke about the collections, and Don Kelsey and architect James Staggerberg led the cavern tours. And the Media Day paid off because there were a number of stories that appeared in local newspapers and also on the air. Now, Thursday was an off day with everyone preparing for the weekend events, which actually started Friday morning and afternoon when we opened everything up to the university community. And here you can see an invite that we sent out for a sneak peek of the Andersen Library. And also some very kind words which continue to roll in for Governor Andersen from his good friend Wheelock Whitney and President Emeritus Peter McGraw and President Emeritus Niels Hassemo. And those are wonderful quotations. And they actually come from a beautiful keepsake booklet that I think Larson Design helped prepare, which was given out to donors and friends of the libraries. So when the moment finally arrived on Saturday, we were ready to party. At 6 in the evening, a brass fanfare formally announced the opening. And for about the next hour and a half, the guests, 600 of Governor Andersen's closest friends, were invited to tour the building, visit each collection suite, take in the exhibition, and walk through the caverns. So here you see the program for the evening. A second brass fanfare brought everyone back into the atrium, and people lined the stairway and every available space in the atrium, and the gallery was taken. Now there is this grainy video that you can view online. If you simply search Elmer Andersen Library, you'll find the video. So these are actually some screen captures from that video that give you some sense of the evening. So here you see on the upper left, people on the stairways and the second and third floor concourses, taking in the events of the evening. There was a stage built right in front of the gallery gate, where all the dignitaries were seated and where speeches were given. Charlie Boone from WCCO Radio was our MC for the evening. And the following remarks from Patricia Spence, Chair of the Board of Regents, President Mark Udoff, and librarian Tom Shaughnessy. The floor belonged to Governor Andersen. And he took advantage of the moment and offered some more memorable remarks. Most notably, he observed how important it was to be a good neighbor, and that our neighbor to the north, the crumbling Studio Arts building, was a disgrace, and that the university needed to do something about it. He knew in the crowd there were legislators, there were other friends of the university, there were regents. And a few years later, Governor Andersen's words were heeded. And the old art building was torn down, replaced by a new facility in what we now call the West Bank Arts Quarter. So never doubt the power of words or a captive audience. Ceremonial ribbon cutting followed the remarks, and then tours continued through the building. On the first floor in the special collection suite, I was busy hanging paper to dry. The paper had been damp and printed on and needed to be dried, and we had put strings across the room and lots of clothes clips to hang these drying pieces of paper. For the evening, we had acquired the services of master printer Mary Jo Pauley, ably assisted by Paul Maravellis, to print a keepsake for attendees, a quotation from Governor Andersen. And almost everyone in attendance left the evening with this memento, which you can see here on the screen. And I love the job description. This is taken from the contract we had with Mary Jo and Paul. Entertaining and edifying letterpress printing demonstration on replicated 18th century wood common press from handset type. And they were wonderful to work with, Mary Jo and Paul. It was a great evening. So we had good press and excellent spring weather promised a respectable attendance for the last events on the weekend. On Sunday morning, Andersen Library hosted a brunch for friends of the library. It was a delightful time, even though we were a bit worn out after Saturday's festivities. What we wondered was in store for us with the final event, a Sunday afternoon open house for the general public. How many people would want to visit a library on such a beautiful day? We soon found out. Over the course of about 4 hours, an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 people descended on Andersen Library. It was a zoo. Every hall and suite was filled. Long lines formed, waiting to take the elevators down to tour the caverns. Seeing the growing crowd, University librarian Tom Shaughnessy gave the order. If anyone wanted to see the caverns but didn't want to wait for the elevator, they could walk down the hill and enter through the portal. We literally threw open the gates. When it was all over, exhausted as we were, everyone knew that they had experienced something special. So I hope you've enjoyed this whirlwind tour on the origins and celebrations of the Elmer L. Andersen Library. That's me at the time with dark hair and gone a little gray and bald since then. And I will say the white gloves were a prop. We don't encourage the use of white gloves when handling rare books. But this was done for one of the university publications. And you can also see there the cover of the very nice keepsake that was given out to friends and donors of the Andersen Library. So thank you for this time. And according to my clock, we've got about 8 minutes or so for questions. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. It was fascinating to hear about the history of the building where I spent so much of my time. We have one question that you've pretty much already answered, which was why was the colorful art building torn down? It doesn't appear to be in the way of constructing Andersen Library.
No, and it wasn't in the way. It was actually fenced off, and there was a blacktop sidewalk created so people could access the building, students. But I remember sitting in my first floor suite in special collections, looking out the window and seeing birds fly in and out of the art building windows and squirrels crawling in and out of the art building windows. And it was a building that had been on that site for decades. It was originally, I think, a sign company that owned the building, and then it was purchased by the university and converted into a studio arts building. But there were major problems structurally with critters, all kinds of reasons. And Governor Andersen was totally correct in calling it out to that gathering on Saturday evening and say, we need to be a good neighbor, and we need, with this beautiful new library, to now build a beautiful new arts building. And the university came through. And I'm pretty sure that there was probably as much intense lobbying from the art community for that building as there was for the libraries for Andersen.
Great. Well, and we have a follow-up question to that one. Were there ever plans for something in the space once the art building was torn down? Do we have any information on that?
As far as I know, what's there now are solar panels, and those arrived, I think, in the last 3 years or so. Real estate is always something that everybody has an interest in on the campus. And so I think there were multiple, at least dreams of what might go into that space. I think at one time the law school might have expressed an interest. There were a few of us, half humorously, but also half seriously, who said we should extend Andersen Library onto that space and create additional gallery space and classroom space. And also, let's create a West Bank campus club where faculty can gather for events and for meals. I think we even took it so far as suggesting maybe there should be some recreational space there for faculty, staff, and students, but obviously that didn't go anywhere. So I haven't seen anything on paper, but it reminds me of one other thing that I have seen on paper, which was the original design for the underground caverns. As presented from the university, included 3 caverns. And for funding reasons, the ultimate design was cut down to 2 caverns. But the piece of paper that I have seen, and I don't know where it fits in the design process, but somebody had sketched out a design that conceived of up to 17 caverns underground, stretching all the way from Riverside on the south to, I think, 2nd on the north. And they even drew in little golf carts, which you would obviously need to cover that half-mile space from one end of the caverns to the other. And that was also part of the original design concept, that these caverns were modular in that additional ones could be added as needed. The original price tag for a new cavern was somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 to $11 million if we wanted to add more cavern space. I think that price tag has now risen to somewhere between 20 and 40 million. So costs have escalated dramatically. There probably will not be any more caverns underground, but at least somebody had conceived that space could handle up to 17 storage caverns. I mentioned some numbers too. Let me throw out some numbers real quickly here.
And then Tim, we have a couple more questions after.
I'll answer the questions then if you want.
Okay. We had one comment from a guest that they thought the painted building was part of Valspar. So this is new information to them that it was an art building. And then there's a question here: when is the special Sherlock Holmes building going to be built? From another one of our guests. And then another guest is asking, can you please give an example of what's in the special collections and rare books?
Well, let me answer that one first. There are some amazing things, including the recently installed Ricci map of the world, which is available for viewing on the lower Wallen Center gallery. There are, in my collection, cuneiform tablets, papyri fragments, medieval manuscripts, early printed books. Any of the curators or archivists could tell you what some of their amazing treasures are. Children's literature has original artwork. If you fell in love with the Pokey Little Puppy, you can see some of that original work in their collection. So everybody has something amazing to offer. I recall in the opening exhibition, one of the pieces that we had on display from special collections was a book on typography published by the Whittington Press, which is still a going concern in the UK. And I forget what the other question was, but my understanding too was that the art building originally might have been part of the Nagley sign company. So if Valspar owned it at some point, that's new information to me.
And Tim, I think if you can do your stats in 1 minute, we have enough time.
I can do some stats real quickly. So there were 93,000 cubic yards of sandstone removed during the mining. There were 4,750 tons of limestone blasted. The limestone estimated age is 435 to 500 million years old. Originally, there were 12,500 high bay shelves and 13,500 mezzanine shelves The capacity in the mezzanine of 67,500 archival boxes. Total price tag for the project, a little over $46 million. And the cavern storage building occupies 83,700 gross square feet, and the upper building 101,300 gross square feet. So lots of room, lots of stuff moved around and removed. Steigerberg, Beyer, Sachs were the architects. CNA Consulting Engineers were the civil and mining engineers, and obviously other contractors. So a few stats.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And please join us again online on November 5th for two presentations. Two Slight Taps, The Lifting of a Baton, the Minnesota Jewish Community Council Symphony Orchestra, presented by Kate Dietrich, archivist of the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives, and a presentation from me on the Social Welfare History Archives. The job is never done, from the Progressive Era to the COVID era in the Social Welfare History Archives. And please remember to check the library's YouTube channel in a few weeks for a recording of today's presentation. Thank you, and we will see you in November.